Welcome to AI for Good, the leading action-oriented, global and inclusive United Nations platform on AI. Organized by ITU, in partnership with 40 UN sister organizations, and co-convened with Switzerland. The goal of AI for Good is to identify practical applications of AI to advance the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and scale those solutions for global impact. In today's session, we're counting on you to use the live video wall feature to ask questions and post comments to help create an engaging discussion. We encourage you to stay until the end to chat, connect, ask questions, and network with our distinguished panelists and world-class AI experts in the neural network. It is now time to kick off the session and welcome our first speaker. The floor is yours.
All right, welcome everyone to this AI for Good session today. We have a special treat. Rigveda Kadam is with us. She is head of digital access at FindDX in Geneva, and they're doing very interesting work at the intersection of evaluation and digital innovation for AI in healthcare. So no matter whether you are new to this topic and want to know about the complexities, or whether you're interested in solutions, which Rigveda has very interesting ones, I'm sure you're going to enjoy this talk. So I'm going to hand it over to her. We're going to have like a 45-minute presentation and then a discussion for your questions at the end. Enjoy.
Thanks, Louis. Hi, everyone. I'm Rigveda Kadam. I'm the Deputy Director for Digital Health at FIND, the Global Alliance for Diagnostics. Let me share my screen as well. As Louis mentioned, over the course of the next 40 to 45 minutes, I'll take you through the work that we are doing at our end to support the evaluation of AI-based digital diagnostics in a responsive and agile manner. As I understand, the audience for these sessions is quite diverse with a multidisciplinary background. So during the course of my slides, I'll first introduce FIND and the work that we do. What is our focus, why we are working on it, what is the overarching problem that we are trying to solve, and within that context, what is the AI-focused work that we are looking at, and then how within that scope, evaluation of AI-based tools is something that we've worked on, what has been the output, and of course, then what are the areas of improvement or what are the potential future use cases that I would especially love to get feedback on. So let me start by sharing my screen. So getting right into it. And like I said, I'll start with the introduction because I'm sure some of you may not be aware of who FIND is or what we do. So we are the Global Alliance for Diagnostics. We were established in 2003 as a not-for-profit product development and delivery partnership. We connect countries and communities, funders, decision makers, healthcare providers, and developers to spur diagnostic innovation and make testing an integral part of sustainable and resilient health systems. We are also a WHO collaborating center for lab trending and diagnostic technology evaluation, as well as have been working under the ACT Accelerator framework as a co-lead for the diagnostics pillar. This was set up by the WHO DG to accelerate research and development and product introduction for COVID-focused tools. We have offices in five sites, but our projects and our partnerships span multiple continents, and we have a very rich partner network, which allows us to work on R&D, on clinical trials, and on access as well. Our offices are in Geneva, New Delhi, in Nairobi, in Ho Chi Minh, and in South Africa in a couple of cities. So first, to, I guess, provide some background on why diagnostics and why testing. I think especially, and unfortunately with COVID, this is something, testing is something that has become quite commonplace and has become part of our vocabulary, from self-tests to PCRs and so on and so forth. And it has also placed testing in the spotlight. Essentially, if you or treatment actions that you need to seek, as well as without testing, public health programs are also blind and they are not able to inform their own public health interventions. The investment case outside of just the value that they can, value testing can add to our own preventative and healthcare, the investment case is also quite clear, as you can see on your screen. Based on modeling work done by various partners, one death can be averted for every 1,000 at-risk workers that are screened, and targeted testing-driven interventions would lower the economic burden 5-fold. They can also empower countries to identify potential threats of pandemic potential and address them proactively. And as most of you would also know, technology innovations like sequencing have been able to really empower our response to the emerging variants for COVID-19 and make sure that the testing, treatment, and vaccine effectiveness is tailored to the variants themselves. What does this imply for digital health? I think not only diagnostics, but more broadly, digital health and AI has really revolutionized the kind of technology that the private sector and public sector can now rely on. Specifically, there are innovations like machine learning that can bring quality diagnosis to areas without specialist healthcare workers. There are, of course, now on most of our mobile devices, there are apps that allow us to screen for symptoms. There are, of course, online resources that we can access. And depending on where we live, we can also link to care using some of these mobile devices and apps. Lastly, we also have near-patient apps and at-home tests ranging from the Apple Watch to then something as simple as a self-test that can be then digitized and interpreted by the mobile device you have in your hand. The focus of our work is for low and middle income countries. And even though the infrastructure as far as internet coverage and mobile broadband coverage is slightly at different levels compared to high income countries, as you can see, it is growing quite rapidly, although there is a digital divide that needs to be addressed, and several partners, including then ITU, are working to address this. The policy and regulatory landscape has also evolved, taking cognizance of how fast this field is moving. WHO finalized and published its global strategy on digital health. The FDA has set up a specific digital health center of excellence to cater for the specific needs for digital health and artificial intelligence-based innovations. There is also a Lancet Financial Times Commission on Governing Health Futures that is attempting to look at 2030 and beyond and understand what are the needs in terms of policies, in terms of research and development, in terms of, in general, like capacity building that need to be identified and that we as a global community need to start addressing. And there is, of course, health data governance frameworks to allow for effective but fair and ethical and transparent sharing of data. And this slide, which is the last one in this section, really summarizes this in a manner where we can look at how the FDA has an increasing number of AI-based technologies that it is approving, and it is growing at a rapid pace. This snapshot provides the FDA approvals as of earlier this week, and the bulk of which are right now for radiology and cardiovascular diseases. But the larger point here is that this is something that is growing at a rapid pace. And while the majority of the innovations, at least from an FDA approval perspective, are radiology and cardiovascular diseases, there are multiple other areas that are also seeing innovation. So what does all of this work and all of this innovation mean in the context of LMICs? Just to take a step back and talk about what exactly are we trying to address as far as diagnostics and diagnosis in low and middle income countries is concerned. There are massive unaddressed diagnostic gaps where 50% of patients on an average across this segment of countries do not get diagnosed. Basic diagnostic capacity is available in only 1% of primary care clinics and only 14% of hospitals in some LMICs. An appropriate tests do not exist for 60% of infectious agents with outbreak potential, while 50% of the top 20 diseases responsible for most lives lost. So this just goes to show that while at a technology level, there are definitely solutions out there that can help address these gaps, where it's failing is in the translation from technology development to then introduction and final patient impact and diagnostic gap impact as well. So to make sure that we are taking all of these infrastructure as well as access gaps into account, we conducted an assessment in 2020 to identify what are really the key diagnostics gaps in the patient pathway, and in the context of those gaps, what are then the relevant digital health solutions, including artificial intelligence-based solutions that can address them. This was a mechanism that we consciously chose to make sure that we are focusing our effort on the problems that can be addressed with these tools, rather than starting from a product perspective and then trying to find a problem to solve. While the assessment itself was focused in Peru, Nigeria, Uganda, and India, which were chosen for the mix of their health and digital infrastructure, it is meant to essentially be representative to the extent possible of what kind of archetypes the digital and health infrastructure mix can bring to people who are working in public health. Based on this, we followed a patient pathway approach where we tried to map out what do people in all of these countries encounter in terms of their own health journey, and what are the gaps therein that prevent them from getting care as and when they should, as far as diagnostics and diagnosis is concerned. And the analysis led us to essentially three major areas of improvement. The first one was around pre-point of care, which was around needing to engage with health and care knowledge. The primary drivers of gaps in these areas were around lack of access to accurate, timely, and trusted health information, low perception of health service quality, difficulty to navigate care-seeking steps, which is to when and where to seek initial care, and the high cost of health services and transport. At a point of care level, so once a patient has been able to understand what they need to seek care for to some extent and where do they need to seek care, at a point of care level, then the first interaction between the patient or the person and the healthcare worker starts. And there was clearly a need to empower healthcare workers and bring screening and diagnosis closer to the patient, because really healthcare workers at a community, at a primary healthcare level, form the first line of defense for any potential pandemics, as well as are on the front lines delivering healthcare services on a day in, day out basis. What are the challenges that they were facing? So under-resourced and lack of knowledge on point-of-care diagnostic tools, long waiting time for sample collection and test results, difficulty in navigating care-seeking steps to sort of look at the different permutations and combinations of what screening and diagnostic and treatment monitoring algorithms to follow. Followed by poor quality diagnostic tests and paper-based tools preventing easy collection and use of data. Then at a national or at a programmatic level, the challenges were primarily around how all of this data and whether all of this data was being collected and used appropriately. The lack of interoperability between systems, and this is something I would say is not only applicable to low and middle income countries, but it has been a challenge given the multiple different digital systems used at different levels of the healthcare system. Lack of multi-disease surveillance tools and lack of visibility into supply chain data for diagnostics were also identified as potential barriers to diagnosis. So we've looked a bit into what's happening in terms of the innovations in terms of testing and why testing itself is important and what that means in the context of LMICs and what are the gaps therein. So this would be then the last slide, which essentially talks about what is the broader landscape of artificial intelligence-based technologies then that we are trying to support to address some of these testing gaps in LMICs. The first one is around empowering patients. So just sort of thinking back to the challenges that were identified. Just to give you an example, we are working with partners to look at supporting the development of artificial intelligence-based symptom screeners and also evaluating them to ensure that they are performing for the target population and are also built on representative data sets. At a healthcare worker level, we've been working, and I'll cover this later in my presentation as well as an example, but we've worked with, again, AI-based chest X-ray image analysis software developers to help support the use of these tools in the context of addressing one of the biggest killers, infectious disease killers globally, tuberculosis. So we've worked with partners to generate evidence on how these tools can be used to improve tuberculosis screening and testing. At the level of informing public health response, artificial intelligence-based tools can, of course, enable surveillance and inform public health action. And then as a part of our overarching focus on the appropriate use of diagnostic data for informing public health response, we are also working with partners to identify these use cases and then support their uptake as appropriate. So what does it take once you've identified, what problem you want to solve that will help address diagnostic gaps in LMICs, and you've also identified the product that can help address those gaps. As this slide summarizes, this is the typical valley of death for diagnostic product introduction. The first valley of death starts from needs identified, or rather is driven by need identification, concept and feasibility, development, lab and clinical validation. So it's essentially talking about the valley of death where you start from start at a product development phase, but the reasons for failure are whether you, for example, not being able to appropriately identify the need that you're trying to address, or whether what you've tried to address at a need level has failed on a concept and feasibility phase. The second valley of death, which is after a product has been commercialized, is between commercialization and then actual product rollout. So this is driven by then once that the product is available, there needs to be an effort made to make sure that there is evidence generated on how that product can add value to the public health programs. And this is driven by policy making bodies like WHO, in-country regulators, as well as research institutes. This determines essentially whether there is support for the technology or the product as to whether they will have an overall impact on public health. This is followed by then country adoption and country transition to scale, and also support needed for scale up and monitoring. So the work that I'll be describing shortly focuses on the second valley of death to some extent, and also the first one, which is around generating evidence to inform policy uptake, and in some cases to inform regulatory frameworks as well. To sort of describe then in the broader context, what we do at FIND spans supporting product developers as well as partners like ministries of health to bridge these valleys of death together. So this involves technology innovation as well as access innovation, which spans then supporting the development of transformational diagnostic tools by either direct funding or by leading the identification of needs, or by helping coordinate and supporting what are the R&D needs at a country or a regional level, to then supporting the generation of evidence on the use of these tools by connecting partners, product developers, for instance, with trial sites and providing support on trial design and coordination, supporting the development of local innovation and adoption, developing marketplace and market interventions to make sure that the innovations that are being developed have an appropriate business case that goes in tandem, and therefore have already potentially a pathway to scale once they're introduced into countries. Working with partners to design new delivery models to make sure that the innovations themselves find appropriate delivery channels. To then working with countries to strengthen diagnostic capacity, providing trainings, and also providing support for global guidance, as well as monitoring and evaluation. Moving on to then, with all of this context, what exactly, I'm hoping here that you have sort of gained a better understanding now of like what the broader scope of work on development, on evidence generation and implementation means in the context of testing and LMICs, and then sort of now zooming into the topic at hand, which is enabling AI-based digital diagnostic evaluation. So why are we focusing on this? I'm sure it might not be news to especially the audience here, but just to sort of reiterate, as of now, most artificial intelligence-based digital health solutions are built in scale for use in high-income countries. And that, of course, brings in various risks, especially around bias, around applicability, around usability. And it's unclear how and when these solutions will work in LMICs, with biases impacting software trained on different populations than it is deployed in. And then currently, there's no consistent standardized process for evaluating these tools. There are, of course, efforts already underway at specific regulatory agencies like FDA and like NICE, but at a more policy shaping level, at a more global level, or also at the level of LMIC country context, there is still that gap that needs to be addressed. So that's why, to sort of in the service of the overall agenda of making sure that any technology innovation, if it can be leveraged to address diagnostic gaps and healthcare service gaps in LMIC, that it is leveraged, we've tried to work with partners to develop a standard independent evaluation linked to policy, regulation, or procurement, which can then offer a transparent approach to evaluating diagnostics in the LMIC context. And I guess one more key point, the way some of the procurement channels work in the broader public health LMIC context is that the sort of global aggregators of procurement or the global procurement agencies often rely on the policy-making bodies to guide them on which are the technology classes or specific products that are now ready for use at scale in LMIC context before they allow these products to be procured by donor funding. So to address this problem, we created, building on the sort of efforts from the different, building on the sort of research done from different partners like Johns Hopkins, as well as, like I mentioned, FDA's Center of Excellence for Digital Health. We try to look at what already exists and what can we add value to. And so we created like this overarching evaluation process to enable ongoing and agile evaluation of AI-based digital diagnostics. This essentially includes sourcing of digital health solutions globally, so actively scouting for AI-based innovations that can potentially address diagnostic gaps in LMICs, engaging with low and middle income countries and other stakeholders on the use cases for AI, creating then in parallel a database in line with ethical and transparent data sharing agreements that can help us quickly validate some of these AI-based technologies on representative data sets, then actually evaluating and validating the technical aspects of these digital health tools. As the output of all of this, generating evidence to support policy, and then post that providing strategic implementation support to partners. The evaluation approach itself, like I mentioned, goes from product scouting and development to then digital to then database construction, which also includes working closely with research partners and implementation partners, as well as clinical trials team for guidance, and then eventually going into the evaluation phase. But I think the point here to also be noted is that this is an ongoing process, because artificial intelligence-based technologies, as kind of also as similar to the overall software as a medical device space, are very, very agile, and by the time a typical sort of evaluation process for a non-AI or non-digital technology would finish, you would already be on like a 4th or 5th version of the software of the artificial intelligence algorithm. And therefore, we needed to come up with like a process that still addresses all of these needs, but is also responsive and is actually in line with the products themselves, the innovations themselves, which move at a very rapid pace. So to provide an example of how this evaluation process then would actually work, for instance, as part of our ongoing clinical trials along with research sites in low and middle income countries, we enroll patients, and after the initial evaluation, the testing data for these patients, as well as their diagnostic data, is collected and added to validation data sets. As just sort of a reminder that all of this is done in strict adherence to the sort of policies in country as well as global policies on clinical trials, and these are done after the approvals from IRBs in country as well. So let's say the use case is around like respiratory diseases. So we would collect data specifically on the specific signal. If it's cough, then we would collect data on cough, combine it with clinical data around, let's say, symptoms, also other digital data. Let's say if there is more data available around the respiratory rate and so on. And then all of this data is annotated by expert expert clinicians or by expert radiologists, depending on the specific product, and it's added into the validation data set. So moving into the next component, after the data itself has been collected and this database has been constructed, you move into the actual validation. So this diagram shows how this actually then works. The next subsequent step after collection of data, or rather in parallel, is around the onboarding and installation of digital diagnostics. So we work with digital innovators to install their software or their product on a find owned but externally sourced digital infrastructure. And I'll talk you through what that entire vendor onboarding process looks like. But the intent is to have that product be available without having the digital innovator have access to it while the evaluation itself is running, to make sure that the sanctity of the evaluation process and the objectivity is not compromised. Once the software itself has been installed, then we move to the find mode. So the first one is called the vendor mode. The second one is called the find mode, where then the vendor access to the software is cut off, like I mentioned. And then depending on what exactly is the diagnostic tool, we evaluate it on the relevant data set. So let's say if it's around the evaluation of chest X-ray images, then we would evaluate it on chest X-ray images that have screening data sets, if it's for a screening use case versus a triage use case. And once this evaluation has been done, then the overarching performance data, as well as the gold standard clinical data, which is essentially a comparator for decision makers to judge whether a performance of a software meets or is better or is not as not equivalent to whatever is the established gold standard. This data is really important for them to decide whether to endorse a particular technology class in the context of screening and diagnosis or not. So this data is then made available in standardized reporting formats to policymakers and regulators. To take you through how the vendor onboarding process itself works. So like I mentioned, the first step is, of course, to understand what is it that the vendors need in terms of installation of the software, then creation of a system under test virtual machine. The vendor installation happens subsequently. Then we test it with custom scripts to make sure that the installation is happened successfully, and that we can actually then start running images, chest X-ray images in this instance, to make sure that we can sort of run the entire data set after the vendor access is cut off. So once the test images have been run and we can confirm that that this is something that we can then do at scale, we also get trained on the use of the software under evaluation, and post which the vendor access is cut off, and then the evaluation process itself begins. So what is the current approach? What is the output then, after all of this has been done? What is it that we are trying to address? So right now we are focusing on these objectives. So the primary outcome, the primary objective is, of course, around performance. So assessing the clinical performance of the product against a benchmark to make sure that the performance is measured against a gold standard. Then there are typically secondary objectives as well, which, for example, would include subgroup analysis. So trying to understand if there is a degree of variation in the performance of the software by gender, by age, by location, by some other metadata. We also look at repeatability to make sure that the performance of the software does not change when exposed to different images to the same image in different sequences. And then finally, we also check for error handling, where if the software is exposed to incorrect data sets, what does it feed back as the output? So to make this a bit more clearer, I'll take an example of how this was done for a very well-established AI-based digital diagnostic category. This is in the context of computer-aided detection, so the AI-based image analysis software for TB screening and diagnosis. Back in 2017, there was one TB CAT product on the market, but since then the the space has evolved rapidly, and in the landscape that we did with our partner Stop TB partnership last year, we identified 22 CAD products that have been commercialized and have received some sort of a regulatory approval. In addition to these new products being available, the products that had been launched previously also have new versions with changes in performance and changes in thresholds. So the larger point here is that in the span of 5 years, the number of products available to address a really critical gap in screening and diagnosis for LMICs for tuberculosis has changed. So to make sure that we are able to work with policymakers who guide the adoption, the development of screening algorithms, and also who feed into the broader procurement decision making. We worked with partners, and of course, under the guidance of WHO, who is the normative body for this work, on the evaluation of the first ever artificial intelligence based tool for TB. So the input there is a digital chest X-ray, which is then processed by the AI algorithm, and that provides as an output an abnormality score and also guidance on like how that moves over time. Based on like the sort of use cases that these products were approved for, we focused on 2 use cases: a screening use case and a triage use case. The screening one is essentially where people are screened for tuberculosis, and the triaging use case is where people are tested and triaged for tuberculosis. Based on the overall work that was convened by the WHO, the first ever recommendation on the CAD software, on the use of these software for ongoing screening and triage of tuberculosis was made available. So just to maybe describe quickly, the triage use case essentially consisted of images from 7 triage studies, and the performance of the CAD was measured against the gold standard. And the screening use case consisted of a compilation of X-ray images from 6 screening studies and also measured against a similar gold standard. In both use cases, the performance of the CAD was compared with a human interpreted with a human interpretation of a chest X-ray, which was done by experienced radiologists. What was the impact of this project? So to make it more tangible, like I said, the first point was, of course, that this led to the first ever endorsement by WHO of an AI-based product for diagnostics. The work itself has grown since then. We have now close to 10,000 images that we have collected in collaboration with academic partners, and we are continuing to build on this. There are various resources available in the context of this that you can see on your screen, which are also hosted on our website as well as our partners' website. And we are expanding this now to other use cases such as COVID-19. So the last slide, I guess, on the evaluation platform itself, the principles that we follow to make sure that what we are doing is at least meeting the basic criteria of it being objective and transparent, is that these images have been curated from different countries under ethical data sharing agreements, and none of the images themselves that were used for evaluation have been shared with CAD developers for training. The independent evaluation has been carried on and will be carried out for use cases that have been approved by WHO. So where is this work headed next? The first, I guess, more immediate and most adjacent use case is around expanding the data sets to address claims by manufacturers outside of the current WHO policy, with the intent, of course, to assess whether the products are now also available to use in some vulnerable populations like pediatrics, or for other use cases such as pneumonia and COVID-19. We are also looking now at a broader landscape of AI diagnostic tools that are potentially fit for use in the respiratory illness landscape. So I already talked about how we have looked at CAD, but aside from that, we're also looking at cuff analyzers, smart auscultation tools, and breathalyzers. To quickly describe in case of interest, essentially the cuff analyzers is where you can even use your own phone or in the case of, like, let's say LMICs, or depending on the healthcare guidelines, the healthcare workers device, where a person would cough into it, and then based on the analysis of that cough sound, there would be a classification score provided for COVID-19 and TB. The second device category that we are looking at is a smart auscultation, which is essentially used to capture both first and foremost, like auscultation sounds, and uses a combination of technologies like smart microphone, in some cases oximeters, and then also thermometer, to provide really in one single device a bunch of useful data for healthcare workers and or doctors to make determination on COVID-19, TB, and in some cases fever for children as well. Finally, we're also looking at breath analyzers and just trying to understand if this is also a device that is ready for use and has applicability in the LMIC context, which essentially works on the analysis of the volatile organic compounds in our exhalations, and the analysis of these on not only in terms of AI, but also in terms of chemistry-based analysis on hardware devices. And this is the last slide. Essentially, apart from like just looking at what more products can we support to make sure that they are able to continue addressing diagnostic gaps in LMICs, we are also continuing to, and this is a point where I would love to get more feedback, both and constructive criticism, on how we can make the entire evaluation process something that's more agile and more sort of in line with the various technological innovations and product development innovations that have happened for AI. For now, based on partner inputs and feedback, the future areas of work then include support for in-country and localized threshold setting and mentoring for local evaluation for post-deployment monitoring. For example, for the chest X-ray image analysis product, one requirement is that there needs to be like a threshold setting that is specific to local population, which is an important step without which the performance of the software itself is compromised. Then we're also thinking through how to include metrics around usability in the evaluation process, also how we can leverage the federated approach to data storage and governance so that it does not rely only on data collection, but can really be sort of can make use of distributed data storage mechanisms and really sort of democratize and decentralize the evaluation process as much as possible. We also, of course, as I mentioned, working with partners to expand and represent data sets, not only for evaluation, but then available for product development as well. And then, of course, recognizing that there are multiple other partners who are leading the thinking in this area, like NICE, the FDA Center of Excellence, and the WHO ITU Focus Group on AI for Health. We, of course, want to make sure we are continuing to learn from them. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, there will also be, there's also time now. We'll also be available for a few minutes post this session on the networking platform. And then you can also reach out to us on this email ID. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Rigveda. Fascinating and such a complex pipeline. I think we really got a good sense today of going basically from figuring out the requirements all the way to evaluating the products that come out of that. Maybe for the participants, a kind reminder. So the way this works is that if you have any questions, feel free to bring them up. As Rigveda said, we will try to monitor the chat and then try to answer them to the best of our abilities. Later, you can follow up with Rigveda via email on the networking session. But yeah, maybe to start us off a bit, going to the first parts of your presentation. So you showed us really nicely also the necessity to kind of go into a very detailed requirements analysis at the beginning of any like process that maybe leads to product development down the line. And my sense is that especially in low and middle income countries, there is a lot of projects also from outside, people willing to help, people excited because the entry barrier to AI nowadays is super low. So people are excited to get started. And then the challenge often comes when we look into actually deploying it in the local healthcare system. So for example, if we go to Ghana as an example, the number of like MRI machines there, I think, is like a factor of 100 lower compared to like the average OECD country. Meaning basically that if we have a model that feeds on data, we first need to have a pipeline set up, acquisition infrastructure that allows us to create that data. And I'm wondering, like, how you, how you see that challenge, and what would be a possible way out of that, so that we basically capture all that excitement and channel it into the right problems, like, you showed in the beginning.
Thanks, Luis. I think that's a great question. What I would say is that, like, it's more of a journey on like making sure that the right data is being collected, curated, and also made available, so that these innovations also can be customized and tailored to specific contexts. There are, I would say, like, there is, depending on the use case and also the site in or like the country, you will find that there is, like data available in much more detail. For example, like I mentioned, for tuberculosis, in some cases for maternal and child health as well, whereas there will be less so much of like quality data available for other use cases as well. I think that's an area where we are therefore trying to figure out how we can support countries, especially regional influencers, to create some open data sets, sort of, either like leveraging existing platforms like Kaggle, and just to make sure then that any innovation that happens also takes into account the sort of context and the population segments from these countries. Does that answer your question?
Yes, definitely. And so, like, maybe going a step further, these activities that you, for example, did in 2020, as I understand with the survey, is there a way for the machine learning community to help maintain that, right? Because the challenge is always these surveys, they are like a snapshot of the time, and maybe 2 years later, as you pointed out, right, this is very agile ecosystem. Maybe the problems have changed, or the possible solutions have changed, the question I think to that would be how we can maintain, or is there inside of FIND initiatives that like researchers can support or send their students to, right, when they have their term project and they start working on MRI, and then they say, maybe we should use a different modality, and like, how can the community basically support these nice projects that you started? Is there an entry point, or is there plans to maintain it over time, or what is a way to kind of make sure this is kind of curated as time passes?
Yeah, I think that's also, again, a great question. I think specifically for the for like the activities or for the work around the evaluation, I already mentioned some of the existing initiatives, and of course we would love to. I mean, we work a lot with research partners and academic partners, and so we would be happy to like collaborate with students who would be interested, and research partners who would be interested for working on this. I think more broadly, though, to understand the landscape and understand more the evolution in the landscape, as well, as far as like digital health and AI is concerned. So that's so I can maybe mention a couple of resources. So there is the Global Digital Health Index, as well as the WHO Digital Health Atlas. They provide some at least context, and that's updated, but it's really more on the infrastructure piece. As far as the sort of information available on like the state of AI adoption and the regulatory policies and so on and so forth. So that's, at least like as of now, it's spread across different places, unfortunately. So I think that's also a maybe point of feedback for us, for FIND, as well as in the community we work in, like how are we collating all of this information in one place so that it becomes available. I think that's a great feedback and suggestion for us.
Nice, thanks so much. All right, then let's maybe jump forward a bit, both in time in this process and also in the kind of topics that you covered in your presentation. And let's say I'm a young and bright student or early startup entrepreneur who has a very interesting solution in either from LMIC or I am having partners there to deploy it. Are there ways for these groups to interface with Find and basically go through these nice processes that you have set up? And the way I understand it, you collaborate, with certain sites. Like, what is the process to kind of go from I have something here to I want to go through this evaluation procedure, from a manufacturer or a developer perspective?
Yeah, so maybe I don't know if it will be available to everyone, but I think so. We are always actively looking out for partners who have an interest in this area, and like I said, like one part of our support is also to provide like that matchmaking between where we see there is a need in specific use cases or context and innovators themselves. So I'm dropping this link in the chat. I'm not sure if it can be shared more broadly, but on our website, we have an open call for partners. So we are actively always looking for innovators and entrepreneurs who are working in the diagnostic space. And we welcome all such contributions. And we would then like sort of try and match it to the appropriate diagnostic problem, and then reach out to like have a further conversation. That's one. And then I also want to give a shout out to our partner Health Tech Hub Africa, which is a recent partnership that has been set up in Rwanda in partnership with Global Fund, Novartis Foundation, Norskin. But the essence is to like provide mentorship, funding, in-kind support, as well as matchmaking support to Africa-based innovators exclusively. And of course, this is in the context of healthcare, and diagnostics is a part of it. So I would encourage all of you to check that out as well.
Thanks so much. Okay, so then let's assume we found a partner to deal with or support with the process of the evaluation, which, as we know, is usually very lengthy and can also be quite expensive. So stakeholders in this space, they typically need a bit longer runway, especially if they're startups who do this for the first time. And then the most common problem that I know of, and that you also captured in the presentation, is around access to diverse and well labeled data. So well labeled, I mean very rich metadata that allows you to do these types of subgroup analyses that are needed to get a full picture of the performance. And I know there's some projects in the US, like Nightingale, who basically try to facilitate this with infrastructure development, connecting hospitals to like a central, like a cloud-based infrastructure, so you can run federated tests. Is there similar? Are there similar projects in low and middle income countries to basically make this type of evaluation also possible and lower the entry barrier to these kind of evaluations?
So I would say that there are bits and pieces of like the whole evaluation process that are available, but not like the like the end-to-end service, so to speak. And that's why I think I mentioned like one part of what we want to do is not have like only one agency or one non-for-profit like Find running this. It's more like just making sure that everybody agrees on what is the evaluation process, and then it's more to then like you can just do it yourself as well. But it just simplifies everything, like you said, for entrepreneurs and startups who then don't have to go like side by side to try and understand what is your requirement, what is your policy process. So that's what we're trying to do then.
All right. Yeah, that's really, I think, a tough nut to crack, especially with the data access. But as you point out, maybe similar to the federated testing, the kind of federated data acquisition and provision might be a very viable strategy to enrich existing data sets. And I know, especially in radiology, we had Mazie on a few months back, who wrote this interesting paper on detecting race in radiology data. And I mean, this was they just enriched the standard Checkspert data with a few labels and made some crazy findings. So figuring out how to, enriching these metadata labels seems like a very opportune problem, I think, to solve for any young and aspiring entrepreneurs who might be joining here today. All right, so at the end, you also talked a bit more about devices and that are maybe customized to specific localities or settings. And I know for microscopy, there is a bunch of projects on the way to make sure we can kind of bring the acquisition instrument for the data also to the point of care at a low price with acquisition quality that is up to the specs of the downstream model that is doing some classification or something else. I'm wondering, in this portfolio that you are currently evaluating, which are the most promising applications, and which do you find are lacking or challenging to kind of solve based on the current technological state?
So maybe I'll answer that your second point first, and then also I did want to go back to the first one. So I mean, like I briefly showed, I think it is kind of driven, like a good indicator is really like the FDA approvals and which category are they majoring in, so to speak. So radiology followed by cardiovascular diseases is also where we have seen much more commercialized tool availability. And within radiology, I mean, our specific focus is on primary healthcare. So we are looking at point of care ultrasound, and then combined with artificial intelligence based image analysis software layered on that. And then I already described the CAD software. So I think image analysis has definitely found like a lot of established use cases, also takers in low and middle income country settings. There is a growing, I would say, interest in sound analysis, so around cuff analysis or like just analyzing lung sounds. And incidentally, I think there were also acquisitions made by pharma companies of diagnostic devices that look at primarily lung sounds and auscultation sounds. But my point being that I would say, is the second most upcoming and popular category where we've seen action outside of like the diagnostic, like the on person or like the person to person interaction. There is of course the use of AI for then predicting and public health predicting hotspots to inform public health interventions. So for things like malaria, the use of elevation data with weather data with like previous epidemiological data has been used to like figure out where to, for this year, target the resources for a malaria control intervention. So that's also a category. The one that I am, I think I haven't seen as much yet in terms of a sort of scaled use in low and middle income countries, but I would be very like excitedly watching the space for is the symptom screeners or like the near patient tools, because I think that is a gap in diagnostic and really in healthcare service delivery across, which is that we always rely on the person who might not actually be feeling that well to go from where they are to like a health facility to get tested, to get access to care. So to be able to come up with a way, I mean, it will definitely not be immediate, just given, the mobile phone ownership, but just the, like the way we are approaching this, that you can even enter your symptoms online in your local language, or like via Facebook, or, some such tool. I'm not like endorsing a particular tool, but my point is that these are tools that are available to the person. And if they can really use that to figure out what they need in terms of care quickly, that saves like time and money for them. And this is especially powerful for people who are towards the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, because to ask them to go to a health facility, and if they're primarily daily wage earners, so you're asking them to give up one day of their livelihood's earnings. So all that to say, I mean, like radiology or imaging, followed by then sound analysis. What I've heard most about, but I'm yet to see some like concrete sort of applicability in LMICs for at scale is the symptom screening bit. I also wanted to, sorry.
You go a bit. I have one follow-up, but you go first, and then I go after.
Okay. So I think you made the point, right? Like how can we sort of engage with innovators, young students in this space? So I think I just want to give a shout out again to my last slide, which is that we are trying to work on this problem, but from a very like certain angle. And we really like, I think that was one of the major reasons for me also to like be so excited to come on this platform, because I want folks to like tell us if we are missing out on something, if we need to do something better. And any constructive criticism or any feedback at this point will be very, very welcome. So I'd be most happy to have that.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I think for this repository, but maybe we can do this follow up offline. There might be some some stars aligning in a fortunate configuration, because especially in the machine learning field, we are more and more kind of converging and consolidating a movement around this kind of data set curation, and we basically, what we are looking for the next ICML is also buy-in from people who lead organizations like you do, to kind of close this gap between, I mean, there's a lot of people who know how to quickly prototype solutions, but to make sure that they prototype in the right problems. And that's, I think, some like a very exciting direction. And others in the audience, like Rigveda said, this is a kind of call to action. We need support from everyone on this, and the more diverse, the better. So please feel free to reach out. I want to just maybe to finish, to just press you a bit on one point, and apologies, like I'm asking this from a more naive position, so I don't have all the insight that you do, but I'm sometimes wondering when we use, for example, use like the FDA approval as a proxy for kind of what's able to fly, what's mature. If that is actually a good proxy for low and middle income country setting. Like I said, right? Like I know that radiology, it's being pushed a lot in research. It's very big industry, and I think in most OECD countries, the infrastructure is there to potentially support it. Then on the other hand, in low and middle income countries, I would say that, like you pointed also with the symptom checker, right, the marginal utility of automating some of the steps is probably a lot higher, because with just automating it, you can get a lot of a bang for your buck. But there is usually a disconnect between the kind of healthcare system overall between these countries, right? So should we really be looking at the FDA approvals, or am I or am I assuming that actually there's too much of a difference, but in reality, these systems are very similar? Yeah, maybe that as a kind of final follow-up.
Sure. I think maybe just to clarify, Luis, I think first I completely agree that the needs identification needs to be driven by like specific context. And I would say like at a very summary level that these would not be similar across high income and low and middle income countries. I think the sort of when we talk about maturity of a technology class, so not so much the need, but like what products are already out there. So that's the proxy. I mean, like that's for which we use the FDA as a proxy. But I think I also take your point that maybe that should not be the only proxy. Maybe then there are already other such, at least like consortia or accelerators, or maybe we look at the venture capital funding landscape in specifically LMICs to see what are some of the specific products there that are seeing more maturity.
All right, we are 1 minute over time, but we will try to not go more over time. So Rigveda, thank you so much for giving this nice presentation. Everyone, please feel free to reach out to her if you have questions, if you have ideas. And we will have this networking session after, so Rigveda will be around for a bit. Any last words?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you and the AI for Good team for giving us this opportunity. It has been a pleasure being a part of this, and for all the awesome questions.
Likewise, thank you so much. And
Thank
also
you.
thanks to Julianne, who's in the background and
Yes.
being master of disaster. As usual, very smooth.
Thanks, Julian.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for participating in today's AI for Good session. We hope you've learned something new, innovative, and engaging in today's event. We now encourage you to continue the conversation on the live video wall in the neural network. Here you can ask questions, like and comment, share links, complete the poll, connect with interesting profiles, or speak one-on-one using the chat and video function. We invite you to explore the lobby, try the smart matching quiz, visit the virtual exhibits, poster boards, the eShop, and build your personalized AI for Good program. Let's shape the future of AI for Good.
AI is a powerful tool.
This summit can help ensure that artificial intelligence charts a course that benefits humanity and bolsters our shared values.
you.